In this video, I'm going to show you the general process of doing a heel flap, gusset, and gusset decreases for a cuff down sock. I have started my sock here, and all I did was I used the long tail cast on for the cuff. I did some 2x2 rib here, and then I worked down just a plain stockinette leg for the length that I wanted the leg to be. Now, the heel flap is worked on 50% of the stitches, and because I am working on a magic loop method here, 50% of my stitches are already on the one side of my needle, because magic loop is worked with one long circular, usually between over 32 inch cable. I think you can do it with a 24-inch cable, but it is a lot more difficult. So either 32 or 40-inch cable is used for the magic loop. And again, I have half of my stitches on the front half and half on the back half. So this is already set up to do my heel flap. Now, to get started on this, you want to start your heel flap on a wrong side row, meaning you don't start working across on the right side row. So you're going to need to work to the end of your round so that you're basically at the beginning of the round, and then you're going to turn your work and start working back in the other direction. So starting on a wrong side row, what you're going to do is you're going to always knit the first stitch of the row. So we will knit the first stitch here, and then we are going to purl to the end, all the way to the end of this row, up until the last stitch in this row. And what we're going to do on the last stitch is we're going to slip the last stitch as if to purl with the yarn in front. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a nice little edge for us for when we go back to picking up our gusset stitches. Plus, it's going to make it easier for you to be able to count your rows in your heel flap, because the heel flap is usually worked for the same number of rows that you have stitches on your needle. So in this case, I have 23 stitches on my needle, and I'm going to want to work 23 rows. However, you need to have an even number of rows for your heel flap, because you need to end on a right side. So instead of doing 23 rows, I'm going to be doing 24 rows, which is not going to make that much of a difference when it comes to the length of the heel flap. Now, if you have a really high end step, then you may want to make the heel flap a little bit deeper, but I'm just going to show you a general practice today. So here I am at the end of the row, and I'm going to slip the last stitch as if to purl with the yarn in the front. That meaning in the front of the work at this time. So I'm going to slip it as if to purl with the yarn in the front. Well, and I consider that the back, because that's the back of the work. And then the next row, you're going to knit the first stitch and then slip the next stitch. Now you're going to slip as if to purl. So you're going to slip the stitch as if to purl, and then you're going to knit the next stitch after that, and then slip the next stitch, knit the next stitch, and then slip the next stitch. And you're going to work in this fashion all the way across this row. So, and what you're doing here is you are adding a layer of thickness to the sock. You see how that yarn is kind of going across the back of the work? It's kind of adding a thickness to the heel of the sock. So you're going to knit and slip all the way across to the end of the row. And then slip. And then the last stitch you're going to slip as if to purl. And you're going to want to make sure, actually you are going to want to make sure it's in the front of the work, because when you work this next stitch, you want to make sure that it's in position to knit that stitch. So you're going to slip with the yarn in the front and turn. And then we're going to knit the stitch. And then we're going to purl across. Always on the wrong side rows, you knit the first stitch, and then you purl all of the stitches across to the last stitch. So here we are at the last stitch. We're going to keep the yarn in the front, which is facing us, and we're going to slip as if to purl. Knit the next stitch, and always on the right side rows, which are the knit side rows, we're going to knit the first stitch and then slip the next stitch. And you're always slipping the stitch as if to purl. Knit and slip, knit and slip. Always slip as if to purl, because if you slip as if to knit, you're going to, when you go back to purl that row, you're going to end up twisting your stitch unless you purl it through the back loop. So again, we're at the end of the row and we have one stitch left. We're going to move the yarn to the front of the work and then slip as if to purl. We're going to turn, and on the wrong side rows, you're always going to knit and then purl across. And here we are on the last stitch. The yarn's already in the front because we were purling, and we're just going to slip that last stitch. Now I will continue until I can count 12 of these kind of chains up the side. You see how there's a chain up the side? When I can count 12 chains up the side on each side, then that means that I am ready to start my heel turn. Okay, here I am on my last 2 rows, and I want to show you again of how you calculate what row you're on. If you look down the side, you can easily see the different chains that are going up. And if you've done the stitches correctly, those little chains will be twisted at the base, so they will be very easy to see. Now, make sure that when you count your chains, that you count both sides, because one side may appear to have the right number, but the other side will be 1 short. So make sure you count both sides to make sure you have the correct number of chains. And again, the number of stitches up the side will be half the number of rows that you need. And the number of rows that you need is the total number of stitches, or the total number of stitches plus 1 if you are working an odd number of stitches. So again, I'm going to knit the first stitch as always. This is a wrong side row, and always knit the first stitch and then purl across for wrong side rows. And you can see, I'll show you the right side when I get to that side, but you can see how the stitch pattern is looking on the back side. It does make a slightly thicker fabric. And again, that will help with the wear of the sock, you know, to make it last a little bit longer than it might if it was just a plain stockinette. And as always, when you get to the end of the row, slip the last stitch as if to purl with the yarn in the front of the work that you're working on. And the last row, again, you want to make sure that you end, got my yarn wrapped up in my needle, you want to make sure you end after completing a right side row. So I'm going to knit and the first stitch, always knit the first stitch and then slip the next stitch. And you're always slipping those stitches as if to purl. Otherwise, you'll twist the stitch. And honestly, it probably won't make too much of a difference in a heel if you have twisted stitches. And then the last stitch, you're going to slip as if to purl with the yarn in the front. So now if we look down the side of this, we will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 stitches down the side, which is exactly what we want before we turn our heel. And the front of it, here it is. This is the actual side, that's the public side of the heel. And you'll see you can kind of see a little bit of a pattern going here. The stitches that are knitted are kind of sunken down a little bit, and the stitches that are slipped are kind of popped up a little bit on the fabric. I don't know if you'll be able to see that dimension in the camera, but that's what it kind of looks like to me on this end. Now we are ready to start working our heel turn. And we need to get to the center part of the stitches to start there first. So we're going to start by slipping this first stitch, and then we're going to purl the next stitches. We're going to purl across to just past the center stitch, and in this case it's going to be purl 12 stitches. Once you purl across to the stitch just past the center stitch, you're going to purl 2 together. So in this case I slipped 1, and then I knit 12, and then I'm going to do a purl 2 together, and then I'm going to purl 1, and then I'm going to turn. After you've done the wrong side row, then you're going to do the right side row. And to know, on the wrong side row you worked to 1 stitch past center. And to figure out where you work back to on the right side row, you want to make sure that you have the same number of stitches on the end of the needles. So in this case, I have 7 stitches on the end of my needle after my purl row. So when I finish my knit row, I want to make sure I have 7 stitches on this side. So I need to work backwards and figure out, okay, I have 7 stitches here, and then I need a knit 1 and an SSK. Oops. So here's my 7 stitches, then I have a knit 1 and an SSK that I need. So I'm going to always slip the first stitch, and then I'm going to knit 4 because that's how many stitches I have here. So we're going to go ahead and slip the first stitch. And I know that sounds kind of convoluted, but you just want to make sure that you're working even number of stitches on each side. Most of the time your pattern is going to tell you how many stitches to knit or whatever, but if you're just doing a kind of a basic sock, you need to be able to figure out how many stitches you need. So in this case, we're going to slip the first stitch, and then we're going to knit 4. And then we're going to do the SSK, and then we're going to knit 1. And again, if we look here, we have 7 stitches on this edge and 7 stitches on this edge before the gaps. And with each increasing row, you're going to knit or purl 1 more stitch in the center. So we're going to slip the first stitch, and we're going to knit across to where the gap is. So you see there's a little bit of a gap. You can kind of see that there. So we know that we need to purl those 2 stitches together. Okay, so we're going to purl across to that gap, and then we're going to purl those 2 stitches together, and then purl an additional stitch. And then we're going to turn, and that leaves us with 5 stitches on this side. Then we're going to slip the first stitch, and we're going to slip the stitch as if to purl, and we're going to knit across. And again, if we look at it, we can see where that slight gap is. I mean, you can really just see that. Just knit to that gap. If you need to count your stitches, then that's fine. And you're going to knit these 2 stitches together in an SSK fashion. And then knit 1 additional stitch. And again, you will have 5 stitches on this side. That is kind of my way of verifying that I have done this correctly. When I look at my stitches, I can say, okay, here's my gap, and I have 5 stitches over here. And then here's my gap, and I have 5 stitches over here. This is after I finish the second part of the second row of my heel turn. And then we're going to turn, and we're back on a row 1 again. So again, we're going to slip as if to purl, and then we're going to purl across to where that gap is. And again, if you look at it, spread the stitches out just a little bit, you see where that gap is. Plus, in this particular yarn, it's 2 different colors, so that will help point it out for you. and we're going to purl those 2 stitches together, and then purl 1 more stitch. You always have to make sure you purl that additional stitch after the purl 2 together, or knit an additional stitch after the SSK. Again, slip the first stitch and knit across to the gap. And if you look, there's the gap. Actually 2 different color stitches again. So we'll just knit across to that. And SSK. And then knit additional stitch. And again, 3 stitches here, 3 stitches on this side, so I'm good to go. Okay, here I am on the last row of my heel turn, and I will go ahead and work across just as I have with all the other rows. Now on this particular row, I will get to the end where my gap is. You'll see, actually my gap is right there between the last stitch and the stitch before it. And there's no stitch afterwards, so I'm just going to go ahead and knit the last 2, or in this case, purl the last 2 stitches together to end off that row. There is no additional knit one after that. And then I turn, again, slip the first stitch, and knit across to the end. And again, on this end, I will just do an SSK at the end with the last 2 stitches, because again, that's where my gap is, right there. And that finishes off the heel turn. Now we are ready to start picking up the gusset stitches and then decreasing the gusset stitches down. So for this, I'm going to use 2 stitch markers just to make it a little easy for me. And we're going to pick up, again, remember our chains down the side? We're going to pick up 1 stitch for every chain down the side. And if you remember, we have to pick up 12 chains. So the easiest way to do this is just to pick up stitches like you would pick up stitches on a sweater. Now it's going to be a little bit cumbersome at first. In fact, I think I'm going to slide some of these stitches off, because I'm going to rearrange my stitches just slightly, because we're going to have to do that anyway. So what I've done here is I've just kind of split the heel stitches in half, and so now I will have my stitches on this side and then my stitches on that side. It just makes it a little bit easier when working the gusset decreases. And then you can rearrange your stitches again once you get all your gusset decreases down. So we're going to go ahead and pick up the stitches along the side. Now you can choose to pick up your stitches either just with the 1 loop here or both loops. Now I prefer both loops, which is what I'm going to do here. So I want to make sure I start at the end and pick up a total of 12 stitches along the edge here. And I don't want to split my yarn or anything. And it does, the stitches kind of roll, the edge of the heel flap kind of rolls a little bit, so you gotta kind of straighten it out just a tiny bit while you're picking up those stitches. And then when you get to the top, you will want to pick up a few extra stitches here at the top, just to make sure that you don't have any holes at the top of your gusset. So if you look at it at the right angle, you want to pick up a stitch here. Okay? Here, if you put your 2 sides of your sock together, you're going to pick up a stitch right here and right here. And that will help close that gap between the stitches from the heel flap that you've picked up and at the top of the foot. So let's go ahead and do that without these fiddly needles. Let's split these, the top of the sock, split those stitches in half. That'll make it a lot easier. Okay, and again, we're going to pick up a stitch here, and we're going to work that stitch. Actually, I want to twist that. I just think the twist will help close that gap a little bit more. And then we're going to pick up a stitch over here. And work that stitch. Okay, so in all, we've picked up 14 stitches along this side. We've picked up 12 from the gusset and then 2 at the very top. Then we're going to place a marker here, and then we're going to work across the top of the foot in the pattern that you have been working the leg in. In this case, I've just been working the leg in stockinette, so all I have to do is knit across the top here, and then knit across the rest of the stitches, because I have now split the top of the foot stitches in half to make it easier for me to work the gusset decreases. If you are working on double pointed needles, you would have one needle for the top of the foot, one needle for the one side of the gusset, and one needle for the other side of the gusset. But since I am doing magic loop, I just kind of rearranged the heel stitches and the top of the foot stitches, and now I can work with it a little easier. So now I've worked across the top of my foot. Now I want to place another marker over here. And so I can, that's where my decreases are going to go. And again, because I picked up 2 stitches on this side at the gusset, I want to do the same thing on this side to make it a little easier. So I'm going to pick up this stitch here and then work it through the back loop. That's one. And then I'm going to pick up a stitch on this side and work it through the back loop, and that's 2. And then I'm going to pick up 12 stitches along this edge. Stitches along that edge. Now I have all my stitches picked up and I'm ready to start working in the round. So I will work 2 stitches before the first marker. And this will be at the top of the gusset. So if you look at the sock, let me see if I can show you. Let me take that out. So here's my leg of my sock, and here's the heel flap, and we are going to be working down the foot this way and decreasing the stitches down. Now, when you're going up the foot and you decrease here, it is going to be a knit 2 together. When you are decreasing on this side and you're going down the foot, it is going to be an SSK. And it's always going to be the 2 stitches that are closest to the marker on the bottom side of the marker that you're going to be decreasing together. So we're going to work up the foot here, up the heel flap to that first marker, and we're going to do a knit 2 together, 2 stitches with the 2 stitches that are right before the marker. So here we go. These are going to be a knit 2 together. And then slip the marker. We will work across the top of the foot. using whatever pattern that you have been working the foot in. And when you get to the second marker, the one that's at the top of the foot on the other side of the sock, you're going to slip the marker and do an SSK. Just like that. And then you're going to knit one full round. And you're going to continue in this fashion until you have decreased back down to a total number of stitches that you started with before you started your heel flap. And in this case, I started with 56 stitches, so I will continue to do gusset decreases until my total overall stitch count is back down to 56 stitches. Again, this is my knit row, but I want to just kind of go over again with you one more time before I let you go. When you're working up the foot, so here's my sock, and when we're working up the foot, up the gusset towards the leg of the sock, you're going to do a knit two together of the two stitches closest to the marker. When you're working down the gusset away from the leg of the sock, the two stitches on the lower part of the sock are going to be SSK. And again, one row of decreases, one row of straight knit, and decrease down to your original number of stitches. And here is the gusset finished, all the decreases down on both sides. I have decreased back down to my original number of stitches. So I have between the two markers, on this side I have 23 stitches, and on this side I have 23 stitches. So at this point, on my next, as I start to work around my next round, I can remove my markers and I can readjust my needles so that the top part of my stitches are, or the top part of my sock is on one needle and the bottom part of my sock is on the other needle. And I will go ahead and work down to the foot, and then I will have another tutorial coming up for the decreases of the toe as well as the Kitchener stitch. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you will come back and check out more of my tutorials. Thanks so much. Bye.